We are live and we are recording. So
Okay.
you want to say anything, Alfonso? You can go ahead and we'll just wait a couple minutes.
Well, we can wait another minute or so.
Okay.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah, people are coming in now. So
okay. You just let me know, Tara.
yeah. Well, it's 4:30 now. It's to you. If you'd like to get started, we can go ahead.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. And I want to welcome you all to the first School of Business. This is our inaugural Black History Month celebration here in the School of Business that supports the university's Black History Month here at Stockton University. And of course, I bring greetings from our president, Dr. Kesselman, our provost, Dr. Susan Davenport, and the entire faculty and staff here in the School of Business at Stockton. Today or this afternoon, we have the distinguished privilege of welcoming two incredible scholars who have graciously accepted the invitation to speak to us about their groundbreaking research that deals with African American history. They've done incredible work and trying to uncover much of what we don't know prior to today about the contributions of Black entrepreneurs. Our two speakers today, Dr. Leon Prieto. Dr. Prieto is an associate professor of management at Clayton State University, and he also holds an associate research fellowship position at Cambridge University's George School of Business in the United Kingdom. We also have with us Dr. Simone Phipps, who is Associate Professor of Management at Middle Georgia State University School of Business, as well as an Associate Research Fellow at the Cambridge George Business School in the United Kingdom. Obviously, together they have written a groundbreaking book titled African American Management History, Insights on Gaining a Cooperative Advantage. And so would like to take a moment to, just kind of open up the event with one or two questions, and then we'll turn it over to our two speakers. So Dr. Prieto and Dr. Phipps, welcome to Stockton, virtually, of course.
Thank you very much. Good to be
Um,
here.
Thanks for the warm welcome.
Great, thank you. So maybe just tell us a little bit about your background and obviously where this all came from. What inspired you to do your book, and then after that we'll let you go ahead and do your presentations. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll let Simone go first.
Oh, okay. Well, I am originally from Trinidad and Tobago, and so I came to the US for undergraduate study, and I studied a combination of management and computer science at Claflin University. And then I pursued my MBA at Ohio University and then my PhD at Louisiana State University. And I've always liked learning, and I like the opportunity to be able to share knowledge as well, and to do research on topics that I actually enjoy or that I'm passionate about. And so higher education provided that opportunity and that avenue for me. So that's why I was drawn to higher education. But I was quite disappointed that during my management studies, that it was very obvious that Black figures were missing. And so Leon and I were inspired to write this book because of the glaring omission we saw, because we knew that Black people had contributed to the field of management, and we wanted to shed some light onto those contributions.
Yes, and I echo those sentiments. And hi, everyone. I'm Leon Prieto, originally from Trinidad and Tobago as well. And my story is very similar to Simone. You know, we're both from Trinidad, and I come from a very Afro-conscious community in South Trinidad. And ever since secondary school in the Caribbean, when I studied history, there were a lot of things that could have been taught that was not there, you know. So the curriculum is somewhat deficient as it relates to the contributions made by people of African descent in many spheres. And it also persisted in the where I continued my education, you know. So Simon and I, we decided to really make a difference in the literature. And I think most people are tired of hearing about Madam Walker. There's a number of Black entrepreneurs and management pioneers and thought leaders that go beyond Madam C.J. Walker. And a lot of the textbooks, a lot of these figures are underrepresented, you know. So it's high time for these hidden figures to come out in the light, come out in the open, and all of our students should learn a thing or two about some of these pioneering figures we're going to talk about today.
Okay, very well, wonderful. So, I think we should just allow you to, take over now and share with us your thoughts and perspectives, and then we'll follow up from there afterwards.
All right, thank you, Dr. Boy. All right, greetings again, everyone. We're going to talk about African American management history, insights on gaining a cooperative advantage. And Simon and I have been very privileged to have the opportunity to write this book and to talk to you all today about this topic that is so near and dear to our hearts. And I would like to start you all off with this word that some of you all may be familiar with, some of you all may not be familiar with this word. And that word is Sankofa. And that is an Akan word. The Akan people are from Ghana. And this word means go back and get it. And this is precisely what Simon and I are trying to do with our scholarship. We were encouraged and motivated to dig into the archives, to uncover some of these hidden figures that have been missing from the pages of our textbooks. And too many times we see people of African descent depicted as passive actors, almost an afterthought. And a lot of people don't realize African Americans and other people of African descent were also originators who founded their own communities, their own social enterprises, their own Black Wall Street. And Black Wall Street has been getting much more popular in the media. Most of you all probably heard of the Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And that was the one that was firebombed in 1921. So Booker T. Washington was the person who came up with the name Negro Wall Street, which eventually turned into Black Wall Street. But Tulsa, Oklahoma was not the only Black Wall Street. You know, there were a number of other Black Wall Streets located in Durham, North Carolina, Harlem, New York, Atlanta, Georgia, and there are others as well. And many of the Black Wall Street, the entrepreneurs who manage businesses there, many of them practice a more communitarian and compassionate version of capitalism. And there's a lot we can learn in contemporary times based on the practices of some of those pioneering Black business leaders. And also there's a need to decolonize the business curriculum. And the inclusion of Black management and entrepreneurship history in the curriculum, it can provide a more robust education that inspires young people for careers in entrepreneurship and management. And we also really need to reimagine what we want capitalism to be. You know, so when we enter the stage of the next normal, we can't go back to the way things were pre-pandemic, because capitalism in its unbridled form, it causes a lot of inequity. You've seen in the community today, and we see a lot of poverty. We see a lot of people who are not truly benefiting from this economic system, right? So myself and others, Simone and others, you know, we have taken on the task of critiquing capitalism, right? So we can make it into a more compassionate economic system that serves all in an equitable manner, right? And there's a lot we can learn from the Black business leaders and entrepreneurs during the golden age of Black business, which runs from the time frame 1900 to 1930. So Dr. Juliet Walker, she's a very well-known Black business historian. Based on her research, she found that during that time period, there were a number of very successful Black businesses in the United States. And what derailed them was, of course, the Great Depression. But during that time period, 1900 to 1930, a lot of those businesses experienced tremendous goodwill, support, and financial performance based on what Simon and I termed a cooperative advantage, which we hypothesized was influenced by African traditions of cooperation during those turbulent years in American history. And on the continent of Africa, many communities, many ethnic groups had these traditions of cooperation. Some of you have probably heard of Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. So Ubuntu is quite popular in South Africa. And there are other countries within Southern Africa and West Africa that really believe in this ethic of cooperation, this tradition of cooperation. And those traditions did not die. They survived the Middle Passage into the, it made it into the United States, it made it into the Caribbean, it made it into Latin America. So there are a lot of practices that I engaged in Trinidad that I thought was uniquely Trinidadian, and I was wrong. It was very much West African, you know. So growing up, I took part in something known as a susu, which also embodies traditions of cooperation as well. It's like a rotating savings club that everyone in the village or the community play a role in, and we save money utilizing being part of that susu. And many other countries in the Caribbean engage in it. People still participate in susus in West Africa, namely Ghana and Nigeria. So a lot of these traditions of cooperation, they survived. So I mentioned Ubuntu. So a scholar by the name of Bangura, he basically conceptualized Ubuntu to be comprised of spirituality, consensus building, and dialogue. And we believe that present-day businesses and social enterprises may benefit from adopting these principles. And of course, we're going to talk about a number of these hidden figures that were left out of these textbooks. So we're not the only professors who are trying to do this, but Harvard Business School had a professor who was teaching a class called Black Business Leaders and Entrepreneurs. He has since retired. So there are not many business schools that are covering Black entrepreneurship and management history. And then some scholars in New Zealand, Cummins and Bridgman, they call for a greater diversity in management education and how management history is relayed. So we are trying to take up that call and put more representation in the textbooks. Now Simone is going to talk about cooperative advantage.
Thank you. So Leon mentioned the African traditions of cooperation and how the African Americans who were entrepreneurial pioneers were able to use those traditions of cooperation and benefit from what we term a cooperative advantage. So we define cooperative advantage as the benefits that an organization possesses and accrues because of its people-oriented approach to engendering spirituality, consensus building, and dialogue for the benefits of its stakeholders, such as employees, customers, and community. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about those three tenets that are also the tenets of Ubuntu, which are spirituality, consensus building, and dialogue, so that we can get a little more familiar with what we mean by them. So starting with spirituality, a lot of times when people hear that term, they think about religion or religious ideals. But it's very important to note that spirituality does not have to deal with religion. It really focuses on people's well-being, considering and caring about people's well-being. So if organizations care about people's well-being, what would that look like? In terms of employees, it means that they would care about them having meaningful work that they can feel proud of, feel like they're making a difference, feel that it's significant. In terms of employees also, it's important to build a caring organization. That ethic of care make employees feel that you actually do want them to be successful. You care about what their needs are, what their preferences are, and also creating a sense of community, a sense of trust. And you also want to create that sense of community and that care and well-being for other stakeholders like customers and the rest of the community as well. In terms of dialogue, dialogue has to do with encouraging open communication and conversation, what is termed as a conversational sensibility among stakeholders. And so to encourage dialogue, you have to make sure that people feel included. You have to be inclusive. And people are not going to be encouraged to voice their opinions and to open up if they feel like you don't genuinely want them to be included. So in terms of inclusion, there's a saying that diversity is inviting someone to the party, but inclusion is asking them to dance. So you want people to genuinely feel like you care about including everyone. Also that idea of building intimacy, which has to do with building a rapport, a relationship, a connection with people, and maintaining that connection, making sure you interact with people. And very often we think of face-to-face as the most effective medium, but other mediums can be effective as well in terms of encouraging communication. And finally, in terms of dialogue, it's important to know that you need to be intentional about dialogue. So it's not about, just talking to say you're talking or engaging in conversation, but you make sure that you share information with employees and you garner their thoughts and their voice in terms of the organization's goals and hopes, so that their dialogue can really play a role in influencing the strategies that the organizations take on and decide to pursue, etc. And finally, consensus building, it has to do with really listening to the dialogue and trying to find a way to reach some sort of agreement. And so it's important to note that for consensus building, you really should seek consensus only after discussions have fully being explored. So consensus building really builds on dialogue. So you have to make sure you share that high quality information so that stakeholders are informed about, they have all the knowledge that they need in order to give meaningful feedback and to really give opinions and suggestions that are going to be reasonable for you to listen to. And make sure that you allow self-organization, make sure you really engage people so that they can then have that dialogue and try to reach a consensus.
All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about the research process that guided this work. And the research question that really guided us was, how did African traditions of cooperation influence the golden age of Black business, which is 1900 to 1930? And while we were doing our research and looking through the archives, we came across a lot of work from W.E.B. Du Bois, who is one of the foremost thinkers in American history, not just African-American history. He's one of the greatest thinkers this country has ever seen. And Du Bois felt that cooperation was a primary aspect of life in Africa, and that during slavery, there were some traditional customs that were retained from Africa that Blacks from the USA and the Caribbean and Latin America as well practiced that survived the Middle Passage. So we researched primary and secondary documents related to Black business history and discovered management thought leadership that was omitted from the canon. So we obtained writings and speeches from Charles Clinton Spaulding, Maggie Lena Walker, and others that exhibited their thought leadership. And while conducting our work, the main theme of cooperation emerged. So this was a big theme, the main theme among a lot of these business leaders and thinkers. They were all focused on cooperation. And one of the main figures we talk about in our book is Charles Clinton Spaulding. So he was a longtime president of the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company, which at one time was the largest Black business in the United States. So in the early 20th century, Charles Clinton Spaulding was as popular as Oprah Winfrey was during that time period. People used to name their children after him. Schools were named after Charles Clinton Spaulding. One time doing furniture shopping, I ran into an older gentleman. He was probably in his 70s. And I asked him his name. He said his name was Charles Clinton. He was named after Charles Clinton Spaulding. And I was pleasantly surprised, So Spaulding was very famous. And one of his nicknames was Mr. Cooperation, hence the term cooperative advantage, So he really embodied these principles of cooperation. And this is just a photo of a 1943 article in the Saturday Evening Post, which talked a lot about his management style and things like that. So he was quite a groundbreaking individual. And now he's considered the father of African-American management. So from 1900 until his death in 1952, Charles Clinton Spaulding managed which was America's largest Black business. And he brought fame for himself, his city. And he was so famous, he would even get letters from West Africa, from young people who wanted to work for his company and also wanted to get a scholarship to go to Howard University or another HBCU, So he was quite famous. And under Spaulding's administration, the North Carolina Mutual, they supported a number of social entrepreneurial projects, So he was very generous. He supported the Black community and he funded various projects, included building of hospitals, libraries, churches, and newspapers. But unfortunately, a lot of his thought leadership was ignored. in the management canon. So we always hear about Frederick Taylor, Henry Fayol, maybe even Chester Barnard, but you don't hear about Charles Clinton Spaulding in the textbooks, and we are trying to change that right now. So he has been overlooked by conventional historical narratives. So this is just one of his thought leadership. This was an article he wrote in 1927 in the Pittsburgh Courier, which was the foremost African-American newspaper at that point in time. So he used to write these editorials in these popular magazines and newspapers, providing advice to budding entrepreneurs, managers, and even his competition, so they could utilize some song management techniques. So he wrote his article, and it was called The Administration of Big Business, and it provided 8 fundamental necessities of management. So he talked a lot about cooperation and teamwork. Of course he did, because he was Mr. Corporation. And he felt that firms should strive to create and sustain a team-based culture focused on the success of the organization. Even though this advice was from 1927, it's still relevant in contemporary times, right? He also talked about authority, the importance of authority and responsibility, and the need for accountability among managers and employees as it relates to their performance. He also spoke about division of labor, similarly to people like Frederick Taylor and Henry Fayol, who wrote about division of labor, right? And he also talked about the importance of adequate manpower, and he criticized historically Black colleges at the time for not adequately preparing students to work in the corporate world. He felt that there was a need for more experiential learning, and he wanted his company and other Black businesses to serve as business labs where students could actually learn some hands-on skills in business management in general to adequately prepare them for the corporate world. And we still see criticisms like that today. He talked about feasibility analysis. He felt that companies should conduct this, or individuals should conduct a feasibility analysis before they start up a company to ensure that they ensure a good market share, right? He also talked about advertising budgets and the importance of conflict resolution, because he did believe in cooperation and mutual goodwill. Another one of his writings that we covered in our book was The 4 Cardinal Points of Entrepreneurship. And he talked about the importance of having character as an entrepreneur. We tend to glamorize, the wolves of Wall Street and people like that. But Spaulding talked about the importance of having integrity and discipline and honesty. He talked about the importance of fundamental business principles. He felt entrepreneurs should have knowledge in an area before pursuing it as a business venture. And he based that on experience. One time his company engaged in unrelated diversification, and they purchased a textile mill. And they didn't really have experience managing a textile mill, so that venture failed. So he based a lot of his ideas on his practice. He talked about the importance of cash flow management, cash, and it's in the importance of having it to ensure the survival of the business. And importantly as well, he talked about social service in business. So the term social entrepreneurship didn't exist back then, but this was pretty close. He felt that businesses should engage in social service and give back to the community in a very robust and meaningful way. And that approach is needed in contemporary times, because we need companies to really value social justice and engage in these practices that enable community well-being. So there's a need for more social sustainability in contemporary times, but Spaulding was doing it in the early 20th century. And him and his company did gain a cooperative advantage based on his adherence to spirituality, dialogue, and consistent and consensus building. So his management style was based on his spirituality. He was a Christian, and his faith guided him a lot of times. And in one article, the author wrote that Spalding and his colleagues are after something that's infinitely rarer than making money. They seem to be charged with a special mission, which is distinctly religious. They want to save their own people, and they want to do it in a practical way. So Spalding felt that it was his mission to help African Americans, and he saw this as something that came from above. He also advocated an open door policy. He believed in dialogue. He encouraged conversations with his employees, people in the community, because he wanted to be a better manager. He wanted to be someone who could really impact his community in a meaningful way. And he did his best to increase company spirit. He would even have oratorical contests at his company to increase the public speaking skills of his employees. He always tried to increase their business acumen. He also believed in consensus building as well. So he was very much a proponent of promoting democracy, and he always sought the advice of others. So he wasn't vain enough to always think that, you know what, he could do it all by himself. So he didn't possess hubris. So he encouraged his employees to share advice as well. And he would always emphasize cooperation, which he felt will ultimately bring organizational success.
Okay, so Leon talked about one of the male pioneers, and I'm going to talk about one of the female pioneers. I'm going to talk about Magdalena Walker. And she also believed in cooperation, and it's reflected in a number of her speeches. She was a very prolific speaker, a great orator, and she gave a number of speeches across the country. And this particular speech that I wanted to draw from, it's termed the race unity speech. And in that speech, she doesn't mention the term cooperation, but it's reflected throughout the speech. And so she talks about the fact that a race is simply a family. It's a big family. And just like we talk about family unity and we want family to come together for the betterment of the family, we should look at our race as a big family that we want united. And so a family unity and that united family should pertain to the race. So that idea of coming together and working together and cooperating was very dear to her heart. And she did believe in spirituality, but the problem she had with religion was that idea that, you should wait till you get to heaven to reap the benefits of being a Christian. She thought it was time to begin to correct that idea of religion. And she wanted to know, why couldn't we have a comfortable place right here on earth and having the earthly possessions that we can enjoy and actually use to make life better. And so she wanted everyone to participate in the effort to bring into the religion that family unity that allowed them to really make an actual living and to be able to be successful. And she used to say, that God intended for the Black community to unite, to join the ranks of the organization she was a part of, which was the St. Luke organization, was a mutual aid society. And that organization was very instrumental in helping the Black community. And she wanted people to become a part of that organization because she said there was greater faith in prayer, which has $1. So she didn't want just prayer itself, but prayer along with work, because people were coming together as a united front. So she wanted people to band together, not only for the purposes of burying the dead and administering to the sick and doing all those things that the Mutual Aid Society helped with, but also to progress economically. So the idea of creating businesses together, banding together for economic progress as well as social progress was important to her. So she said, we have the money, the brains, the capability. So now we need to arise together and show, what we can do and really move together towards race unity. So Magdalena Walker was very much an advocate of cooperation. So in the United States, if you're not familiar with her, she was the first Black woman to charter and own a bank. She was also the president of that bank. It was called the St. Luke Penny Savings Bank. And it wasn't just a bank in order to make money. It was really a social enterprise because it facilitated both the economic and social development of the Black community. Black community was able to not just save money, but to use that money to create businesses and also to increase home ownership among the community, which was a very big achievement for the Black community at that time. And so because of the bank, home ownership among African Americans significantly rose with the bank's help. Also, she was instrumental in the creation of a department store called the St. Luke Emporium, which had the aim of providing quality goods and services for the Black community at an affordable price, and at the same time to provide jobs for Black women, because at that time, Black women were usually relegated to what we would see as marginalized jobs, like domestic workers, or being washerwomen, etc. So they were relegated to certain roles, and she felt that they should be able to pursue any avenue that they wanted to pursue. And she wanted to create those opportunities for them to learn skills and to have the opportunity to then use those skills in something else as well. So, and she was instrumental in a number of other initiatives as well. And so in terms of her gaining a cooperative advantage and going back to these tenets of spirituality, dialogue, and consensus building, she really cared about the well-being of the Black community in general, and especially about the well-being of the Black women. She had a special place in her heart for Black women. And in one of her speeches, she said that women's sphere should no more circumscribe every woman to the hearth, the broom, the wash tub, etc. Pretty much they shouldn't just be relegated to the house and doing work in the house, but they should be able to do whatever a man did as well, as ability and adaptability. That ability and adaptability should decide what a woman wants to do. And so she should not be relegated to a role that she is put in without her own input into that role. In terms of dialogue, she was a proponent of discussion and conversation. One of her colleagues stated that they couldn't give her too much praise because she was always available to them, regardless of the time, whether she was sick or well, rain or shine. She sacrificed her time and her home duties because she was a family woman. And whenever they needed advice, she was there and she never failed them. So she was open to discussion. She always had that open door. She established that connection with her stakeholders, listened to them. She was attentive, made sure everybody felt included. In terms of consensus building, she listened to people's concerns and she wanted collective action to make a positive difference. So she wanted to make sure that in all her initiatives, that it was clear that it was a result of what people needed, what the community needed, so she could be responsive to the needs of the community so that they could work together to make those things happen. So in terms of cooperation and African traditions influencing Black entrepreneurship, those tenets of Ubuntu, the spirituality, the dialogue, the consensus building, they were very prevalent and they were of great value in influencing success in terms of the entrepreneurial ventures that the Black pioneers had. And the reason they were so valuable is because cooperation allowed these enterprises to build sustainable enterprises. There was more sustainability because remember, by themselves, it would have been harder to access capital, etc. But when you have people coming together, working together, pooling resources, you're able to benefit from that added sustainability. Also, that idea of increased employment opportunities for people, and not just employment opportunities, but employment opportunities that may have been outside the realm of what they thought was possible before. They became possible because of cooperation. You saw increased philanthropy because when people work together, they're able to help more causes. And then there's that idea of reciprocity where people then pay it forward. When they get help, they're also able to help someone else. And that idea of increasing self-worth, because when people have employment opportunities, that gives them that sense of pride when they're able to do things that they feel proud about, that they think they're making a difference in the community. They feel that sense of pride, that sense of self-worth. And so cooperation also allows an enterprise to be able to really help with different disparities and to help reimagine really capitalism. And so there are a number of lessons that you can learn from Black history. It has been found that African Americans are more likely to try starting a business than whites, but they're more likely to fail in the early stages of the entrepreneurial process. So it's not that they don't try, they do try, but usually they fail for a number of reasons. And some of those reasons are that Black communities very often lack that framework to create a successful enterprise because they lack entrepreneurial role models. And we know that role models are very important when it comes to transferring entrepreneurial knowledge to people so that they can gain knowledge, gain experience, etc. Role models are very important. And so for students, especially students of color, examples of successful Black business pioneers increase that entrepreneurial knowledge, that entrepreneurial self-efficacy or confidence, because then they see people who have been successful, who experience the same challenges that they will face as people of color, and they can learn from those experiences, learn the strategies that they were able to utilize to be successful, and they can apply those strategies. And of course, it's a sense of motivation that you get as well when you see those role models in the text. And it's not just for students of color. We have to mention that you can gain lessons from Black history for students who are not students of color, other students as well, because they're able to benefit from a more complete education. Leon mentioned earlier that you get a more robust education when you see these other perspectives. And so gaining knowledge based on other perspectives is very important as well. So you know that it's not only one way, but other people, other communities have different traditions as well that are valuable. They have different philosophies, different practices that you can also draw from. Also, other students can get a greater understanding of other contexts and the challenges that they bring. And so hopefully that can also bring a greater sense of empathy and a greater sense of compassion that students can take beyond graduation and into the workplace. So some implications for contemporary times, these lessons of cooperation and seeing and learning about these pioneers from history, these Black pioneers from history. Currently, there are some issues that face the Black community, like unemployment and underemployment. You see educational disparities in terms of access to educational opportunities. And when there is access, it's access to lower quality educational opportunities, and therefore you get lower educational outcomes a lot of times. Also, there are disparities in terms of housing. There is still what we call racial steering, where real estate agents direct individuals from the Black community to less desirable housing or neighborhoods. So that is a problem too, where you see housing disparities and even elevated levels of homelessness in the Black community. And these are problems, yes, but they should also be viewed as opportunities to make a difference. And so we need entrepreneurs and business leaders who reflect the pioneers of yesteryear and exhibit that more compassionate and communitarian form of capitalism in terms of trying to address the problems that they observe in the community. And where are these entrepreneurs and business leaders educated? They are educated in our business schools. And therefore, the business schools have a role to play in terms of molding them and developing them. And the way to do that is to facilitate a more inclusive and comprehensive curriculum. So there's a lot of talk about decolonizing the curriculum. So you want a curriculum that embraces Black management history, the contributors and the contributions made by the Black pioneers. And you want a curriculum that reflects the principles and practices that encourage these African traditions, such as cooperation. So just some ideas for future inquiry. We do not want to stop here, of course. It's important to conduct additional research to unearth more Black managers, entrepreneurs, and management thought leaders. And of course, additional research to unearth the Black women who contributed to management thought and practice, because there are a lot of them out there in history as well. And we want to uncover more themes associated with the golden age of Black business. So cooperation is one theme that was uncovered, but there may be others as well that would be interesting to discover. And then finally, an experimental design to actually measure the results of organizations that embrace the tenets of Ubuntu, like spirituality, dialogue, and consensus building. So in conclusion, we want to just reiterate that the Black business pioneers like Spalding got their start in business due to their involvement in systems of Black economic cooperation. And those African traditional systems of cooperation and philosophies such as Ubuntu permeated their way into a more modern form of business in the United States and the rest of the Americas. And so there is a place for cooperation in these contemporary times as well. And we want to reiterate that idea of cooperative advantage. You know, it's more than just increasing efficiency or maximizing profits. You really have to think about people as well, about building and maintaining meaningful relationships with people within and outside the organization in order to benefit all stakeholders that are involved. And so in the business schools, we need to play a role in covering management history in a more complete way, where you can learn about the African traditions and philosophies, as well as the African-American business leaders and entrepreneurs who played a role in inspiring organizations to develop that cooperative culture, and which helped them to achieve success in the end. This is the book where we talk about Spalding and Magdalena Walker and others like Annie Turnbull Malone, Madam C.J. Walker, and some of the other pioneers as well. And so feel free to reach out to us as well. We can be found on LinkedIn, and we can also be found on Twitter. And that concludes our presentation.
You're muted, Alfonso.
Okay, how was that? Okay, it would be nice if I'm unmuted. That was fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Prieto and Dr. Phipps. I'm sure there is some question that will be coming your way, but maybe I'll just kick it off, and then I'll have my colleagues, our assistant dean and Taramash sort of chime in as well, and then we'll open it up to the general audience. The first question that after listening to this wonderful presentation is, Have you all begun to see improvements in how minorities are viewed in the business world? And if so, can you cite instances, examples where perhaps this is beginning to manifest itself?
I think it's beginning to make a positive difference. Recently, we were contacted by a professor at the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom, and he was inspired by our work and some other works as well to create a class in England at the University of Exeter called The History of Black Entrepreneurship. So the class is using our book and a couple of others as well, and it revolves a lot around Spalding and some of his contemporaries. And a lot of the students were very happy that this course was being introduced, because during the Black Lives Matter movement a couple of months ago, this was not just unique to the United States, it was all over the world. So the students were pressuring the university to offer more classes that really embraces the diversity that this world has to offer. So the students made a big push for it. And when I found out about the class, I was happy about it, and I even shared it on my LinkedIn. And then all of the students of the university made my post go viral. So they were very excited to see me mention their university. And other universities as well are offering courses revolving around Black entrepreneurship history. So you got Morehouse College, which is an HBCU, but the curriculum at a lot of Black colleges still needs to be decolonized, believe it or not. And one of our colleagues at Morehouse in the business school, he decided to create that course. And one last thing to show how we're getting more prominent and the standings of the contributions of African Americans is getting more prominent is Thinkers 50, which is an organization based in London. And they normally recognize the top management thinkers, usually people like Michael Porter and Clayton Christensen, the late Clayton Christensen. And those two gentlemen who I just called, they were named to the Hall of Fame. Well, the most recent inductee to the Thinkers 50 Hall of Fame was Charles Clinton Spalding. So they found out about the work we were doing, and they were just so intrigued and so fascinated by the contributions and thought leadership from Charles Clinton Spalding that he was recognized in this very prestigious organization. So now we're seeing a number of textbooks offering information about Spalding, and hopefully other Black management pioneers and thinkers will be included. So we're seeing a greater appreciation for the contributions of people of African descent.
Definitely. I want to add to that, yes, perceptions in terms of how minorities are seen in the business world, they are gradually changing, and we do see improvements, but of course there's still a lot further that we have to go. So, you still have people with stereotypes of who Black people are and what they come to the table with, stereotypes of, what is professional, and they may see Black people as not being as professional because of something as simple as an African hairstyle or having a natural hair or something like that, which has absolutely nothing to do with your expertise, your business acumen, etc. So we still have those kinds of problems that still come up every now and then. And so we do have a ways to go still, we're not there yet.
Yeah, wonderful.
Keep in mind, I don't get too much comments about my hair.
I do.
Yeah, I totally, and I'm with you as well, wonderful. We have, about 40 people in the audience, so I'm sure some of them want to get in, but I have one more question and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues. Obviously, we have an audience here, not just our faculty, but also students and other members of our campus community. but this is Black History Month. Can you take just a few minutes and just sort of share with us your advice to some of our minority students here at Stockton who have a desire to become entrepreneurs when they graduate, and perhaps, how the concept of cooperative advantage may be something that they could embrace to really become successful once they get into the entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Okay, some advice. Well, first I will draw on the advice from Charles Clinton Spaulding himself, that importance of having a feasibility analysis. A lot of times the students jump into something because they like it or they think it sounds enjoyable, like they'll have fun, like it's exciting, but you really have to make sure you do your research, make sure you research the industry, how attractive the industry is, if there really is a market for whatever business you're trying to get involved in. You got to pay close attention to whatever the product or the service is, if people will really buy that product or service. And of course, you need to make sure that you pay attention to financial feasibility. Do you have the capital to start this business or access to the capital? Will you get a loan? Will you get an investor? You have to think about the potential earnings of that particular business. So you don't want to just jump into a business. You want to reflect on your own self, your knowledge, your experience in that area, to make sure that you're going to be able to maximize your chances of being successful. And so that feasibility analysis is really important. And in terms of bringing the corporation aspect into the equation, there are cooperative means of starting a business. And so you may want to think about that, getting into business with someone else so that you can pool resources and have to rely less on the more traditional means of gaining capital, like banks, for example, because very often the terms of a bank loan may be, not as encouraging as a white counterpart might get, etc. So these are some of the things that they wanted to think about.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I think I'll turn it over to my colleagues for their own questions, and then we'll allow the audience to come in. Tara will moderate the questions.
Evening, everyone, and thanks to those who just joined us recently. My name is Esther Lawrence. I'm the Assistant Dean in the School of Business. And Drs. Prieto and Phipps, thank you so much for being here with us today. And that was awesome information that you gave us. I hope you share your slides with us as well. Okay. One of the questions I have for you, have you began to see an improvement in how minorities are viewed in the business world? I'm sorry. Number 4, sorry, question number 4 is what I should be asking. What advice do you have for faculty in business programs to help guide them so that they're sure that they cover the diverse content in their courses?
Well, in terms of advice you could provide faculty, Simon and I will be happy to share resources, so we have a number of articles and we even have one coming out pretty soon with Harvard Business Review and Harvard Business Publishing, Inspiring Minds, on how to guide faculty members on integrating Black history. So we'll be happy to provide information about, the golden age of Black business, or even pre-colonial African entrepreneurs. So people, they think Africa was a primitive continent, but they'll be very surprised to know that there was a lot of entrepreneurialism on the continent pre-colonial times. For example, there's one gentleman in particular, Jaja Opobo of Nigeria, and he was a highly successful African entrepreneur, but due to the Berlin Conference, where they divided Africa, they curtailed a lot of entrepreneurial ventures from local entrepreneurs on the continent. So there's information out there, and there's some resources of course, our book. There are also other books as well. There's a great book by Dr. Juliet Walker on the history of Black business. Her book is very comprehensive. And then there's a book by Dr. Jessica Gordon Nemhart called Collective Courage. And she provided a very thorough history of the history of Black cooperatives, which is an alternative form of entrepreneurship that was practiced within the Black community. So W.E.B. Du Bois, he was a very big proponent of Black economic cooperation during the very early 20th century. So Dr. Jessica Gordon Nemhart, she pretty much continued in his scholarship by providing a lot of information on the history of Black cooperatives. So there are things out there, but Simon and I, we created an article recently that curated a lot of that knowledge, and we'll be happy to share it with the faculty at Stockton.
Thank you.
I will ask the next question, but before I do that, I'd like to encourage our audience, if you do have any questions, please do put that in the Q&A and we will take care of that for you. So my next question, Drs. Phipps and Prieto, is, do you see the prospects of another Black Wall Street in America? And if so, where do you think these communities will emerge from?
Okay, I definitely see the prospects. There's definitely potential for one or even more new Black Wall Streets to arise, as long as the community is ready to come together and to make that concerted effort to work as a unit in order to make it happen. And so it really can happen anywhere where there is a gathering of the Black community. Atlanta is definitely being in Georgia, Atlanta definitely is a place that you can see that happening. And there are a lot of other places where there are vibrant communities of color where it can happen. But, you need to take the step more than just having the idea, to actually put in the work and decide that, we are going to do this together, and not me by myself as an individual.
You see, one of the issues is access to capital. So a lot of budding Black entrepreneurs really have that problem accessing capital. So we also need cooperation as well from investors. So we're seeing a big push impact investing, and there are some investors who are trying to play a part in promoting more Black entrepreneurship and other people of color. So we're seeing a greater push for that today. But in the absence of those impact investors, we need alternative form of entrepreneurship and economics to play a role as well. So cooperatives is another viable option, and the failure rate for co-ops is much lower than traditional for-profit businesses, so maybe we need more people of color to start worker cooperatives that could actually play a role in creating jobs and promoting economic development, so hopefully with the Black Lives Matter movement and a greater Black consciousness has taken place, we will see a re-energized focus on building some of these cooperatives that played a role in the past. And we also cannot ignore the Black church, which is the oldest institution, the oldest Black institution in this country. And a lot of these Black businesses had its start in the Black church. And even in, I don't want to say recently, but there was this gentleman. We wrote an article that came out today in MIT Sloan Management Review. His name was Reverend Leon Sullivan. He's a legend in Philadelphia. Most people in New Jersey should know about Reverend Leon Sullivan. Before he joined General Motors on their board, he was the first African American to serve on the board of General Motors. He promoted a lot of entrepreneurship via the pulpit. He encourages church members to pool money, and he started businesses. I think one of the first Black shopping plazas, maybe the first Black shopping plaza in the United States, was started by him and his church members in Philadelphia. So we can see opportunity for alternative form of financing via the church, via cooperative means that could really spur on more economic development and entrepreneurialism among the Black community.
Definitely.
Great. Well, while we wait for the, I'm sorry, Esther, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead. We have one last question, but if you had a question for you.
No, go ahead. I'll let you.
Okay. Our last question. What do you want the audience to take away from your book and this session?
Well, definitely we want them to take away the value of cooperation, and that you really can gain an advantage via cooperation. We also want the audience to take away the idea of the importance of spirituality, remembering that it doesn't have to deal with religion, that spirituality has to do with well-being, and it's so important to think about people's well-being and not just money, profits, that should be the priority, but really thinking about people as well in order to make a difference. And finally, that idea of capitalism not having to be unbridled, that you can temper it, and that you can have a more compassionate and communitarian form of capitalism where the organization benefits and the people benefit as well, whoever the stakeholders are, whether it's the employees or the customers or the community at large. Everyone can benefit if we just come together and we have that mindset of cooperation.
And to echo what Simone is saying, that capitalism doesn't have to be unbridled. People take things too far, especially as it relates to Adam Smith and his Wealth of Nations. They focus on the invisible hand of within capitalism, but they don't realize before he wrote Wealth of Nations, he wrote a book called Theory of Moral Sentiments. So we have allowed ourselves to get carried away in terms of our behavior, in terms of be it competition that's just too negative, or maybe not caring about people within the community who are out of work. And for example, with this global pandemic, a number of the companies that signed the Business Roundtable before the pandemic, they were saying, we're going to engage in a new form of stakeholder capitalism. But the first sign of the pandemic, they laid off a lot of workers, and a lot of these people were left unemployed and couldn't even pay their rent. Some were being actually kicked out, So we see companies that claim they're going to engage in stakeholder capitalism not doing their part. I understand the importance of making a profit. We are not naive, but at the same time, we have to value well-being as much as we value making a profit. So the tenets of sustainability, it's economic sustainability, environmental sustainability. We also have to focus on social sustainability as well. We have to consider the global supply chains of our companies. We have to consider labor practices. We have to consider people getting a living wage. So capitalism really do need to be reimagined. And we are proud of the fact that a lot of these Black business pioneers that we covered in our book adhere to a more compassionate and humanitarian form of capitalism, that we can all learn some important lessons today.
We do have a couple of questions that actually have come in to the Q&A here. The first one I'm going to ask you is, to what extent do you see interest in African scholars back in Africa interested in decolonizing business curriculum, and are you getting any cooperation from them?
In terms of African scholars, there are some, and it's growing. It's growing. I have Simon and I have a good friend and research colleague by the name of Dr. John Kalu Siri. He's of descent. He's Igbo, just like Dr. Buehi. And recently, Simon and I led a special issue of the Journal of Management History, and we called for papers that dealt with Black and African-centered histories of management. And he wrote a very interesting piece on Igbo management philosophies. And we are seeing a lot of interest in his work. And there are some other debates happening among African scholars from the continent, debating whether is there African style of management. Some people are saying yes, some people are saying no, but that's the whole nature of academia. There's always room for debates, So we're seeing more and more African scholars attempting to decolonize the curriculum, and the movement, I believe, is very strong in South Africa. So there are South African scholars calling for decolonization of the curriculum. And it's not just in management, there are scholars in other fields as well on the continent who are trying to decolonize their own fields. There's this book I really like called Decolonizing the Mind by a very prominent Kenyan literary giant. His name escapes me right now. My pronunciation is very bad of his name, Ngugi. So he wrote this very influential book that dealt with the arts that has inspired African scholars in other fields to try to engage in decolonization work. And it's not just the arts, it's not just business, it's also in medicine, it's also in the sciences, because there were innovations that happened on the continent that Europeans learned and took credit for. And that was pretty much pioneered in Africa. So we're seeing greater collaboration now, but it could be better. I encourage more collaboration.
Yes, as Leon mentioned, the other fields other than business as well. I remember seeing a number of articles that pertain to engineering, and they were talking about decolonizing the curriculum in engineering, because a lot of practices that are very Eurocentric, a lot that they teach in the classroom, there would be other means that someone from Africa would be better able to address certain problems who come from a small community or a small a kind of town in an African country, based on what they experience, based on what they see, and they can put that knowledge together to contribute as well. So they wanted a combination of practices, Eurocentric and African-based, to be included into the curriculum for engineering. Yeah, so definitely it's in management, growing interest in management and other fields.
Great, thank you. There's a lot of people who have said thanks so much for sharing your insights and your presentation and everything with us. And one other question that we do have here is, what platform can students be able to purchase your book?
You can get it on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Definitely available
Great.
on Amazon, Kindle, and also traditional hard copy.
Great, thank you. I don't have any other questions at this point. Dean, did you want to say
Yes,
anything?
I do. I have 20 other questions to come. No, I just I read this morning a piece that came out in the MIT Sloan Management Review, where you shed some light on how the corporate boards in the United States can actually gain competitive advantage, or in this case, cooperative advantage, by diversifying, certainly recognizing the need to encourage a more passionate or compassionate business board. What's your, what's the general thesis that you see emerging from your discussion in this piece that you wrote that came out today?
Okay,
Well,
go ahead, Simon.
well, we notice that, well, of course, we need to make a difference. There are a lot of problems in society that need addressing, and organizations can find a way to address them. But if you have organizations that are so focused on making the profit and not really on community well-being and stakeholder well-being, one of the ways to encourage that push towards looking at stakeholders' interests and well-being is who is on the board of directors of these companies. And a lot of times people talk about diversifying the board, which is very important. You need diversity on the board. But in addition to diversity, you also need people who are passionate about community development, who are going to be advocates for community development and for sustainability and for social justice issues. So if you have those board members who are passionate about those types of elements, then you can quicker see a push for the company to make strides towards making a difference in those areas.
Definitely. So General Motors, as I mentioned previously, in the 1970s, they invited Reverend Leon Sullivan to serve on the board. You know, he's a Baptist minister, you know, and some people felt he wasn't qualified, but he was very business minded and he was quite an intellect, quite sharp. And he did some groundbreaking work with General Motors that they benefited from, you know, and he actually caused them to engage in more humanistic works. You know, they really pushed the South African government to improve conditions for people of African descent in South Africa. And keep in mind, even though a board may hire someone with a social justice and sustainability or community development background, it is not a panacea to solve all problems facing society. Those individuals may even get criticized from their own social justice community for not going far enough, you know? So this is not saying it's going to solve all problems, but it's a start, right? You know, so boards already are comprised of a lot of capitalists. Why not include people who are advocates of sustainability, community development, and social justice? That should make capitalism into a more fairer and more compassionate economic system.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. And I have one more, and then I'll shut up. And as I'm sure in the literature, you know, as I've studied your work, there are obviously some people who are going to draw parallels between cooperative advantage and socialism. Are you getting that sense? And if so, how are you dispelling that to really focus on the virtues of your principle, you know, of cooperative advantage?
Well, we haven't been called a communist just yet. But but in terms of being somewhat similar to some of what we're saying, similar to socialism. What we're saying is this: capitalism currently is in need of a tune-up. And this economic system is not going anywhere. You know, the capitalism is here to stay for the most part. But what we can do is infuse some values that focus on our shared humanity as human beings. Because Ubuntu, one of the meanings of Ubuntu means humanity, you know, and from our very earliest days on this planet, we were not individualistic. We engaged in very communal behaviors. We looked out for each other. From the very first time we entered this planet, we embodied communitarian values. And those values persisted when the first wave of people left the continent for Europe and Asia and different parts of the world. And if we look at some of these societies today, a lot of them still engage in communitarian values that has progressed their societies. For example, the Scandinavian countries, they pretty much engage in a lot of these things we are talking about today. You know, they have traditions that might be called socialist in America, but it has allowed their society to progress in such a way people are living a very high quality of life. And I believe that every American deserves, you know, to be living in a society that values them and that they have the opportunity to earn a living wage and live a comfortable life where they could purchase a car and a home and maybe have enough capital to start a business if they so desire. You know, so some people may say what we're doing is radical, but to me, the crazy thing is not adhering to some of these principles and going and practice business as usual. That's like the definition of insanity, doing the same thing and expecting different results. We're going to continue to devolve as a people if we keep practicing capitalism the way it has been done pre-pandemic, you know?
Yeah, so we're not saying, you know, let's totally forget about making money as an organization. We're saying that we need to find some balance. You know, it can't be just about the money. You have to think about people too. And it's easier to find that balance if you think about well-being, but you also engage in dialogue, because then you understand better what people's needs are. And if you get input from people, that shared knowledge can help you to meet some of the needs of people and to make a difference and make the money that you need to make as well. And, you know, just a very quick example, I want to draw from the chocolate industry, for example, which is a huge industry that makes a lot of money on a yearly basis. And, you know, executives in the top companies in the chocolate industry, they make millions of dollars. But the poor farmer who is planting the cacao in countries in Africa or in the Philippines or in South America, you know, they're barely able to survive, you know, and so how can you reconcile those two so that the poor farmer is able to make a living wage as well to have a decent living? And some of those big chocolate companies actually signed an agreement to try to eradicate some of these unfair practices and also some of the other problems like child slavery, etc., on those farms. And they didn't really succeed. And you wonder sometimes if they were really serious about succeeding, because when strides were made to increase the wages of the farmers, then there were suppliers that stopped purchasing from those farmers. So do they really care about, you then ask yourself, do they really care about making a difference if strides are being made to help them and then they decide to not buy from them because prices are a little higher, you know? So you really have to strike that balance between making the money and thinking about people's well-being.
That's just fascinating. That's just a phenomenal. We are approaching our time limit here. What I would like to do is just take a moment to thank you both. This has been an incredible evening. The entire community here on campus of Stockton University. We wish we could show you a beautiful campus, but that will have to wait until next time. But on behalf of the faculty, on behalf of our students, our entire staff, I want to thank you both for, taking time. Obviously, your incredible work is getting noticed all over the world. I think earlier today, the Thinkers 50, recognize your work. And so I think the whole stream of in the role of African American management leadership thought is going to be here to stay. So I want to thank you once again. I appreciate the time. And can we give these people a round of applause, however you can do it virtually? Use
Thank you.
use your whatever, what is it, emojis, whatever. Okay. So thank you very much. Thank you, Simone. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you
Thank
for
you
having
so
us.
much. This was a pleasure.
Okay.
It was.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Anything else, Tara? Shall we?
Just a lot of people saying thank you for a great presentation. Thank you so much. Excellent presentation. Very resourceful. Great insights. Cannot agree more. It's great.
Good. All right. Okay, guys. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay.
Stop recording.